As most of you are from warmer climes, and I'm just very thankful that we were almost 20 degrees today to make it probably better than it is going to be in the next couple of days. So I too would like to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet, the Ngunnawal Ngambri people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. So this conference is an important part of the university's commitment to advancing justice for First Nations people in Australia, but to the people of our region, and embedding Indigenous equity and justice across every part of ANU, and putting equity and justice in everything that we do. As indicated, it's been 3 challenging years in which borders were closed, international travel was limited and was often impossible, and it is great to, again, being able to host this conference in person rather than by video, and many people in this room I've had a chance to see on video, and it's good to finally see you in person again. And I do see the opportunity to bring people from across the Pacific to come here to Australia's national capital. So we are proud at ANU of our long and deep engagement with Pacific studies, with Pacific peoples, and with the Pacific family. The wide support for this conference from across ANU, from both the ANU College of Law and the ANU College of Asia Pacific in particular, I think demonstrates our diverse and ongoing commitments to research, to teaching, and to public outreach that serves our region and the world. And if you think about what universities are, they're a place that you can convene conversations. That is the most powerful thing we do. We teach and convene conversations. I really want to thank the conference organizers, Professor Katerina Teawa, who you're going to hear a lot from, I'm sure, over the next couple of days, Professor Rebecca Monson, Lisa Hilly, and the main organizer, Tale Mangione. Well done. I was literally astounded to see the list of people here. We have Dame Meg Taylor, who I met 4 years ago in Fiji and invited here, and it's taken 4 years, but we're here. So it's great to have Dame Meg here. Taloma Naroni Slade. Senator Hilda Hine, unfortunately, is not able to come because of COVID, so COVID is still about, I'm afraid. Former President Anate Tong, it's great to have you back. I've been on many videos with him over the last few months. We have former Ambassador Kalipate Tavala, Ms. Maureen Penjueli, and Professor Mahendra Kumar, amongst many others. All distinguished leaders from across the Pacific region, and we do welcome you all to ANU, and thank you for joining us. You helped convene that conversation. I also want to acknowledge and welcome Australia's recently appointed Ambassador for Gender Equality, Stephanie Copus Campbell. Stephanie and I both grew up in Alaska, so probably the only 2 people in this room who share that. Yeah, at same age, she looks a bit younger than me, unfortunately. We also have the newly appointed Justin Mohammed, Australia's Ambassador for First Nations people. It's the second time I've been able to welcome to our campus, the first being on the day he was announced. So welcome back. And I just think it's great to have the 2 of you here because you have such critical roles leading Australian government's efforts in what we're talking about as part of this conference. Stephanie, as the lead advocate on gender equality and the human rights of women and girls, and Justin on embedding Indigenous perspectives, experiences, and interests across Australians' foreign policy. And so playing those key roles, I hope will help Australia use its 65,000-year history to better connect with the region, and so I do thank both of you for being part of this. We also welcome those from across the Pacific Australian diaspora, including students, youth, and our Pacific communities. And so it is wonderful to have us all here, to have the conversations. I really look forward to seeing what comes out. And without further ado, I think, Katerina, I'm going to hand back to you.
Thank you so much. We have 3 welcomes this morning because this is a wonderful collaborative event. And so can I please introduce the Dean of the College of Asia and the Pacific. You are here in the Coombs Lecture Theatre, which is housed in our college, Professor Helen Sullivan. Her research and teaching explores the changing nature of state-society relationships, including the theory and practice of governance and collaboration. Very appropriate. She also looks at innovative forms of democratic participation, new thinking about public policy, and the practice of public service reform. Helen has also been leading the college in a challenging time, and I think to keep all of our spirits up, she has the most fabulous shoes that she's wearing tonight. Helen.
Thank you very much, Katerina. Special shoes for a very special occasion. Distinguished guests, colleagues and friends, welcome to the College of Asia and the Pacific, and particularly to the famous, or should I say the infamous, labyrinth of the Coombs building. For those of you who have never experienced it, I encourage you to walk out of this door and into any corridor, and then we will probably have to send out a search party to find you. But picking up on one of the things that Brian said, one of the reasons for this hexagonal, very complicated and difficult to navigate building is that it elicits unexpected conversations. And that's one of the things that's really important for us, to be able to enter into conversation with people who come from very different backgrounds, very different disciplines. And so the building may be vexatious and frustrating for many, but it does have an underlying good purpose. We also, for your added delight, erected scaffolding around this building for the conference. I apologise for that, but this is a university that is constantly in need of renovation, and so it was inevitable that there would be some building work. But anyway, back to the building. And in this building sits the renowned school, discipline, area of study of Pacific Studies, which has hosted many a distinguished scholar, PhD candidate and visiting fellow, researching and supporting policy on the island region since the 1960s. We are honoured to welcome all delegates and participants to the biennial conference of the Australian Association of Pacific Studies. Over the next 4 days, I understand you have an incredible range of keynote plenaries, as well as creative, relational and traditional paper sessions, addressing the many fields that make up interdisciplinary Pacific studies and that extend research and teaching beyond the academy. The Australian Association for Pacific Studies was founded in 2006, right here in our college. We hosted the second biennial AAPS conference, Oceanic Connections, here in 2008, before it travelled to Melbourne, Sydney, Wollongong, Cairns, Adelaide, and then back to Melbourne. It has been 15 years since then, and quite a lot has changed in Australia's relationship to the Pacific and how we come to think of ourselves in relation to the islands. Our current era is marked deeply by both the impacts of climate change, sustained advocacy for climate action and climate justice, and intense geopolitical competition. Pacific Studies has never been more relevant, and we are proud to host Australia's only bachelor's degree in Pacific Studies and several honours and master's programmes and graduate certificates focused on the Pacific. We are so excited that the School of Culture, History and Language in CAP, in partnership with our good friends in the College of Law, the ANU Gender Institute and the ANU Pacific Institute, has brought together such a diverse and exciting range of speakers and participants who represent a wide spectrum of social, cultural, political, research-based and artistic engagements across Oceania. I understand that the 2023 conference also represents the most Pacific Islander keynote speakers and participants that the association has ever brought together. And I am under no illusion how difficult that has been to make happen. The College of Asia and the Pacific is so proud to support these transdisciplinary efforts by the organising committee to place Pacific peoples, issues and voices front and centre in a time of critical regional, political and environmental transformations. I too would like to thank Serena Williams and her family for the powerful welcome to country that foregrounded the importance of these Aboriginal lands that we live and work on, and in a way that signalled the links between Aboriginal Pacific families and communities. Thank you as well to Brian Schmidt, our Vice-Chancellor, for his constant support for our unique mission in Asia and the Pacific Islands, and to my fellow Dean in the College of Law for so generously partnering with the school and our college in this important endeavour. The late Professor Epeli Hau'ofa, for whom the memorial lecture and panel that follows is named, was a PhD graduate in anthropology of our predecessor, the Research School of Pacific and Asian Studies. He became regionally and globally renowned for centering Pacific knowledges and values, and indeed seeded a vision of the region focused on a blue continent that now shapes all regional politics. So welcome to our college, welcome to the School of Culture, History and Language, and please do enjoy the next 4 days in Canberra. Thank you.
Can I finally introduce our partners from the College of Law, and particularly Professor Anthony Connolly, the Dean. Yes, Anthony. So Professor Anthony Connolly is the Dean of the College of Law, but before entering academia, he was an Indigenous rights lawyer working with Indigenous groups in Western Australia on native title, cultural heritage, human rights, and juvenile justice matters. His research and teaching continues to focus on Indigenous rights, particularly with respect to cultural heritage, intercultural recognition, Indigenous self-determination, and self-government. Welcome.
Too many speeches are just not enough. We all know that. As a lawyer, I can't resist the opportunity to say a few words at least. Like others here, I'm very grateful also to Serena Williams and her family for the wonderful and generous welcome to country. And I offer my respects to her, her people, and her elders, who are the traditional owners of this land. As Dean of the ANU College of Law, I am honoured to greet you, the participants in the AAPS Biennial Conference this year. Our college is very proud to co-host this conference, along with the College of Asia and the Pacific, and in particular the School of Culture, History and Languages. As the Australia's National Law School, we've long understood that we have a distinctive responsibility to engage with questions of law and justice, not only within Australia, but also across the Pacific. We know that many questions of justice in Australia are bound up with questions of justice for the peoples of the Pacific, for example, in the First Nations and in the environmental spheres, where we are particularly active. And of course, Pacific leaders, Pacific academics and lawyers and students and activists have long been at the forefront of debates and developments regarding an array of issues within regional and international law which impact us here in Australia. As Professor Sullivan said, academic engagement with the Pacific and its peoples has rarely been more relevant than it is at present, and I think the numbers at this conference reflect that very clearly. And we in the College of Law are alive to that, the importance of this, and it is our intention to play our part to the fullest in this. I know that the conversations which will occur over the next few days here will be crucial to advancing education, research, and other initiatives that are in the service of and not merely about Pacific peoples, communities, and places. So I hope all of you, the participants at this conference, benefit from your time here at the ANU over the next few days. And please enjoy the conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're just going to take a very short little break for anyone who might need to leave. And we completely understand people's schedules and their needs, especially after hours, with families, etc. So we're just going to take a 2-minute break, and then I'm going to hand it over to the president of AAPS, Mandy Triguez. So just a little break.
Lahiatu. I don't know if there's anyone here from Niue, but you know, putting it out there. Yes! Welcome, bonjour, Iorana, you are right. Yakwe, malo ma'aluli. Warm Pacific greetings to everyone. I'm sure I've left people out, I'm sorry. That's as far as I've got. I'd also like to acknowledge Auntie Serena Williams for her welcome to country, and I also note the custodianship of the Ngunnawal peoples over millennia too long to count, and their care of land that has never been ceded. I'd also like to acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present. So tonight we gather for the Epeli Hau'ofa Memorial Lecture, which is convened every year by the Australian Association for Pacific Studies, and it's also the opening event of the AAPS conference, To Hell with Drowning. And I also need to note Katarina, Rebecca Monson, Lisa Healy, where'd she go? And Tale Mangione, and I'm particularly impressed with the font you found, Tale, seeing it up in large form up there. It's fabulous. So just a couple of words about Epeli Hau'ofa. We've heard some things about him tonight. He was born to Tongan parents in PNG, went to school in PNG, Tonga and Fiji. He studied at universities in Australia and Canada. As has been mentioned, he taught at USP and was for a while secretary to the late Tongan monarch. I don't think this was a high point actually for Epeli. Taufa Hautupofa, before moving back to Fiji, where he became the founder and director of the Oceania Centre for Arts and Culture. He was truly a son of the Pacific. I first encountered his work in the early 80s through his witty and biting stories, Tales of the Tekong. You should find it if you haven't read it. When he was questioning things like what was known as the Pacific Way and the obsession with development in the 70s and 80s. But now he's much better known for his influential essays, Our Sea of Islands and The Ocean in Us, which have helped to indigenize Pacific studies in increasingly fruitful ways, especially by his understanding that the Pacific Islands are connected by the ocean, and that is an incredibly important part of identity across the ocean. It was a very inclusive vision of what the Pacific is. And that influence has spread well beyond Pacific studies and has helped to usher in what is now known as the Blue Humanities. Tonight our lecture's taking quite a different form, isn't it? With input not from one, but from an extraordinary range of Pacific leaders who are going to give us the benefit of intergenerational wisdom of the Blue Pacific, and we're so privileged to have you all here with us. So I'll hand back over to Katarina. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. So in true Pacific fashion, because we're going to be talking about the present and thinking about the future, it is also really important for us to think about the past and those who have come before us. So crossing our fingers, the IT works. We just have a short tribute video, and we understand we may not have captured everyone. So I'm Barnabin, and we usually apologize in advance for any offense that we may inflict on anyone, but also that any mistakes are our mistakes. But this is our way of acknowledging those who have come before.
Isa viola lo etava mamao ho sinona ko si oto feao fa kapo beko hai tenelava e te mana tua ae o whaanga ne ngangatu mai o alaha Feluteni si eku ofata engata Isa, you are my only treasure. Must you leave me so lonely and forsaken as the roses will miss the sun at dawning? Every moment my heart for you is yearning. The purple shadows fall. Sad tomorrow won't down upon my sorrow. Don't forget me not when you're up far away. Precious moment beside dear Suva Bay. Isale Nanong kurarawa Ni ko sana natowena mataka pau nanuma torasa mai suva nanuma ti konga.
I also want to acknowledge the passing of Serapi Namaliu, who I know is very close to quite a few of you who are here today, and especially Dame Meg, who still came even though she is so busy, grieving and being part of the ceremony and the community that has to do what they need to do with his passing. And to anyone else that we may not have acknowledged, holding them in our memories. So much amazing, wonderful work has gone into this conference, and part of it has been bringing together what I think is some of the most extraordinary voices and diverse views and experiences from across the Pacific and across many generations as well. So I'm so excited that this year we could have a dialogue or a talanoa instead of our normal individual keynote for the Epeli Hau'ofa lecture. I think Epeli would have loved it. He would have loved this format. And I particularly want to thank Dame Meg and Soli Middleby for actually conceiving of this idea. So one of the most amazing things about this conference is that we didn't have to generate all the ideas and the content because people like them were so excited about the opportunity and came up with the ideas about how they wanted to share. So it was so brilliant and really humbling to be approached by Dame Meg and Solly with this idea about intergenerational wisdom of the Blue Pacific. I think one of the things that's exciting about this conference is that we could have had many current leaders, but instead we got something better, which are leaders who can now speak their minds frankly and truly and say all the things that they didn't say when they were in their positions. So this is super duper exciting because we're going to get the hopefully raw, unfiltered, and really staunch sorts of ideas and opinions about what's going on in the region that we may not have heard before. So very excited about that. Now, we have a wonderful group that we've brought together, and I do hope you've read all of their bios because it will take quite some time to get through all of the bios. So rather than me introducing people, when I direct a question to them, I hope you can also say more about yourselves in the ways that you would like people to get to know you, because I think official bios can only do so much. So this is an amazing opportunity to hear from you about how you would like to be seen and understood by others. So as Mandy mentioned, this is our annual Hau'ofa lecture, and it's also 30 years of our Sea of Islands. So our Sea of Islands, for any of you who are in Pacific Studies, is like a corner of the canon. Our canon consists of very few texts. In one corner is our Sea of Islands that was inspired by his time in Australia and the Pacific, trying to grapple with development and how development was getting put on the region. And the other corner of the canon is actually Terence Wesley Smith's Rethinking Pacific Island Studies. And both of these are from the 1990s. So if you read our Sea of Islands and Rethinking Pacific Island Studies, you've got like half the canon in Pacific Island Studies, where we like to keep things short and sweet and simple. And this particular text had like 2 references. And it was probably Epeli going, oh yeah, all right, I'll put a couple of notes in here, but you get my ideas, and this is what I think about what's happening in the region. So it has been 30 years of our Sea of Islands. And if you haven't read it, please go and read it. So in recent years, the transformative words of Epeli Hau'ofa and his contemporaries have firmly found their way into the practice of Pacific regionalism. Regularly quoted in policy documents and strategic plans, framed and represented in conferences and workshops, you do not have to look far to find that many islanders are deeply committed to the ocean in us. Arguably, at their most transformative, these words have supported the strategic repositioning of the Pacific as an oceanic continent, the Blue Pacific. But they have also been the subject of quite a bit of appropriation. So all of you know the scholars who might just read our Sea of Islands and nothing else, and go and run with it and not read all the other scholars of Pacific Islander heritage or Pacific Studies scholars. So quite a bit of appropriation as well. So this year's Hau'ofa Memorial Lecture takes the form of an intergenerational talanoa between students, activists, practitioners, public officials, and leaders. And I should say, I'm so grateful to President Anote Tong for stepping in, because we were scheduled to have Senator Hilda Heine from the Marshall Islands participate, but as was mentioned, unfortunately, she contracted COVID. And I know it's not easy to be slotted in at the last minute, but we are so grateful to have you join us as well. There is a lot of Melanesia, Micronesia, Polynesia dynamics, and it's really important to have voices from across all the different parts of the region. So thank you so much, Korapa. So we have myself being joined by Dame Meg Taylor, Tuiloma Neroni Slade, President Anote Tong, Chope Tarai, Isin Terunga Rei Baintes, and Moe Moana Shwenki. Together, the group will share their collective reflections, reservations, and projections of the ways in which core ideas from Hau'ofa and transdisciplinary Pacific studies, where Pacific people define their own pasts, presents, and futures, are reverberating through Pacific-led regionalism, collective activism, the Pacific Way, and responses to global geostrategic competition. Thank you so much to all of you and to everyone gathered here today. So I'm Katerina Tewa. I'm a professor in Pacific Studies from the School of Culture, History, and Language, and I've been at ANU for a very, very long time. I came here in 1999 as a PhD student, so quite a while ago, and one of the first things I found in this labyrinth of the Coombs building was Epeli Hau'ofa's old door label. And it was the office that I was ushered into. They said, oh, you can use this room. And I was like, oh, it doesn't have my name on it. And they're like, oh, just take out the label and flip it over, because we were really all about recycling at the time, and just write your name on the other side of the label. But on the other side was Epeli Hau'ofa's name. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like a sign from the universe. So it was brilliant. It was brilliant. And then I had a really different experience at the ANU after that, but that's okay. So, you all know what I'm talking about. You all know. Nevertheless, deeply committed and in love with Pacific studies, and we have been working on the field ever since. So, Epeli Hau'ofa's oceanic visions, writing, and poetry has inspired countless people to question historical and neocolonial framings of islands and islanders, and instead construct a regional identity on the material reality and the powerful metaphor of the sea, of the ocean. Hau'ofa was not the first to imagine our saltwater connections, but perhaps the first to articulate what he called an ancient truth and its relevance to everything from everyday life to development and politics for 30 years. So 30 years later, let's think back and reflect on where this vision has taken us, because Epeli was criticized heavily for his vision in the 1990s, and in fact the greatest criticism came from other Pacific Islanders and his colleagues. They thought this was a whole bunch of fanciful nonsense with no instrumentalist or practical use to anyone at all. And now we're here in 2023 with a powerful vision of the Blue Pacific that's up against so many other visions of the Pacific, like the Indo-Pacific and the Asia-Pacific and a bunch of other different Pacifics. So I'd like to ask Tuiloma Neroni Slade, as someone who has been working at the heart of regionalism for decades, as a judge, as Law of the Sea negotiator and Secretary General of the Forum, how have you seen Hau'ofa's ideas about an oceanic Pacific identity that exists beyond local, cultural, and state borders? How have you seen that actually have an impact?
Distinguished colleagues, the way that Epeli Hau'ofa has been described is he's almost mythical. And I suppose that he will be remembered more by the power of his words, in particular by his rejection of what has been described as the imperialistic confinement and belittlement of Pacific people. And it'll be a wonderful memory, I think, to be remembered in those terms. He has been so inspirational for all of us in such a way that I think Hau'ofa has created a Pacific-centered world. And that's a pretty wonderful tribute to one person, one academic, one deeply committed Pacific personality. And yet, he has also challenged that Pacific people should take charge, that we should assert responsibility for the oceans. We hardly ever know that or speak of that. I think it's important that we remember that part of the words of Epeli Hau'ofa. It is necessary to do so because Pacific peoples have traversed large areas of one of the most important oceans of the world. We are ocean dwellers. This is our home. As he says, it is ancient truth. But remember also that Hau'ofa's essay also provides his acknowledgement of what he calls an expanded world and our responsibility for that expanded world, in part to ensure the sustainability of this part of the Pacific and ultimately for the well-being of the whole of mankind, humankind. Equally, I think it's absolutely important that we remember that side of Hau'ofa. And Madam Moderator, I think it's in that larger context that I want to look at how his words and ideas may have inspired, and I do believe that it has inspired the region and the development of our Pacific. I ask that we remember that in 1971, when what we know today as the Pacific Islands Forum was first created in a meeting in Wellington, New Zealand, among 7 leaders, then the only independent leaders of then the only independent countries in our region. There were 2 main concerns and subjects on the agenda, the inaugural agenda. The fear of our leaders and indeed our communities of French nuclear testing, and secondly, the law of the sea. 1972, when leaders had their second meeting here in Canberra, the leaders wanted the citizens of the Pacific, they wanted the Pacific countries to come together and to work together to send representatives to the first substantive session of the Law of the Sea Conference that was to start in Caracas, Venezuela in 1974. And so it was that our region had started its preparations to participate in that conference. 6 Pacific countries, those that were then independent, were able to meet, to go to the Caracas meeting. Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, and the Cook Islands attended that meeting. Now, just imagine the event. The world community, it's taken the world community 3 tries to produce a convention on the oceans. We now have the 3rd convention on the law of the sea. That started in that conference in 1974. It is quite significant when you think about it. It was one of the largest, most important conferences ever called by the United Nations, ever. And yet, only 6 Pacific countries were able to attend and to have a Pacific voice, 4 of which were small island countries. Those of you who work in the field, perhaps teach international law and the law relating to the oceans, will know that Australia and New Zealand put together substantial teams, not only of the most senior lawyers amongst them, but some of the best legal minds from Cambridge and Oxford University. My country, I was a young lawyer, and so was my friend from Tonga. Fiji sent a large delegation. Cook Islands sent Sir Albert Henry, one of our finest orators. But his true purpose there was to protect the nodules that had already been discovered or had been known in at least rudimentary ways, might be found in the Cook Islands area. Sir Albert had also come because we had heard that many countries from around the world, including from Africa, particularly the larger countries, they were convinced that the fairest and the best way to go about marking out the territorial aspects of the law of the sea was to limit it to size of country and population. So he, Albert Henry, and certainly all of us, were out there in as much as we could to protect our interests. There were a multitude of issues, difficult, complex, in law, in science, and in the political complexities of these conferences. Our delegations from the Pacific therefore had to concentrate on what we saw as some of the key issues. The then proposed territorial limit of the EE zone, 200 miles. We wanted to ensure that that zone was not limited by size or population. We concentrated on the regime of islands to come with the full attributes of sovereignty. We wanted to concentrate on the resources within the EEZ, in particular, the exclusive rights of the coastal state to the resources of the area. Minerals, but more particularly, the living resources of the region. So, Madam Moderator, these are some of the important issues that I think we have, our region were able to function together and function in a way that we have come to know as the Pacific Way. It probably was the first occasion, one of the earliest occasions, for framing the Pacific Way. Ratumara, of course, in the context of his country, Fiji, had spoken of the need for people of different cultures and races and being able to come together, to live together, to work together for the good of all. They're the same words that apply aptly and completely to our region as so diverse as ours. I'd like to suggest that the experience of the law of the sea had given exposure and had given the impetus of initiative to our region to work together in strategic manner, in organized manner. And I think the experience of that particular conference has also sparked off some of our critical work in this region. Let me start with the Rarotonga Treaty of 1985 on the creation of a nuclear-free zone in our region. The second ever attempt by a region of the world, second only to the South American community, to establish such a treaty. And it's very important because it exists and is as valid today as it was then formulated. This region has been able to agree on a Nomad Convention for the protection of the natural resources of this region, mainly because of the highly specific and unique hydrological conditions of our region. We have been able to agree on the Waigani Convention for the transportation or the safety transportation of hazardous material across our region as a result of it. And I believe that directly as a result of the experience of Caracas and the Law of the Sea Convention, our region has been able to take a very active part and to make contributions in important conventions such as the climate change. We have been able to do so because of our early realization of the interaction between the oceans and the atmosphere, because we've seen the very great dangers that has resulted from climate change. I've heard somewhere Epeli Hau'ofa saying it is the ocean that unites us, but it's also the ocean that is a fatal danger to all of us. And what happened in Samoa in 2009 with the tsunami make it so absolutely correct that that is so. So it's both an abundant source of resource for our region, but it is also a source of danger. Now, one of the most uniting factors about our work in the oceans I have observed in the creation of the Fish Stocks Agreement, and to see an exceptional contribution from our region when so many Pacific Islanders were able to take part so effectively in that important conference. This, of course, is a conference that provided for the conservation and the efficient management of the strapping fish stocks or the tuna resources, of which our region is so important in the supply for food and other things to the rest of the world. And right now, the region is also engaged in very important work before the International Law Commission on sea level rise and its relation to international law. Now, I have no doubt in my own mind, and I would suggest that this has been some of the most distinguished tributes that we can pay to Epeli Hau'ofa because of its inspiration and the central control that he has placed on the ocean. Now, of course, we've got the 2050, what's it called? The 2050 plan for the oceans and the Blue Pacific. So now, in a very Hau'ofa-ish sense, we have the political ambition of this region to reach beyond national borders and to look directly and to the future of an oceanic continent and region. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and for setting what I think is a really important historical stage for us to reflect and think about these issues. What really strikes me is we talk about regionalism a lot, but we don't actually think through the details of regionalism, or even think about the histories of regionalism and the ways in which different voices, different ideas came together and really truly made a difference on the global stage. Like, we've been arguing a lot that the Pacific has been thinking about climate change, for example, for 30 years, but we sometimes forget that the Pacific has actively been intervening and trying to have its voices heard on a global stage for a whole range of issues, and actually sparking and inspiring things decades ago that are now taking fruit today. So this is part of, our rethinking the capacities and the power of the Pacific and of Pacific peoples who have actually been doing the hard work for many, many years. So thank you so much for setting that historical context. Can I move now to Dame Meg Taylor and also to President Anote Tong? Both of you have sat in really key regional spaces doing this really important work of helping us all reimagine and kind of keeping that regional kinship going, often in the face of many, many other challenges. But your own countries, cultures, and childhoods coming from Papua New Guinea and Kiribati, for example, couldn't be more different. From the highlands of Papua New Guinea to coral atolls where you can feel and hear the ocean. And this was one of the criticisms of Hau'ofa, actually, that people in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, no way were they going to be able to relate to our Sea of Islands. To which my sister said, you know how rain works? And she started talking about rain and waterways and the fact that all waterways are connected. So one of these criticisms, and one that sustained the views of Melanesianists, particularly at the ANU, who were opposed to an oceanic vision and what they saw as very Polynesianist type of regionalism and regional identities, was this idea that it was irrelevant for others. Micronesia was often quite absent from those conversations altogether. So it was a bit of a Melanesia, Polynesia kind of tug of war for an oceanic vision or lack of vision. And this was absent at a university like ours and also in other parts of the South Pacific. So how have you both seen the ocean and waterways shape local, national, and regional identities, but also provide platforms for action, particularly in the areas in which you focused on, in key cultural, political, geopolitical, legal, or economic and development spaces? Thank you. That's the problem with academics writing the script.
First of all, let me thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being here. Katerina, thank you very much. Also to the Dean of your school. I think it's a very limited vision to think that Melanesians, particularly Highlanders, can't grasp the concept of a regional identity. Obviously, they just didn't know how curious we were. Being a very proud Highlander, I ended up being the Commissioner for Oceans, and I used to stand there and say, this is from Highlands to high seas, to have history. Yes. But I think if you look back on our history, well, 90 years this month, actually, it's the first contact patrol into the Highlands. And when my father arrived there was cowrie shells, there were kina, there was kirikiri. Where did they come from? Islanders didn't know that they came from this vast ocean, but we traded. We were great traders all the way down to the right coast, coming up from Medan, all the way into Bena, then through the Highlands, right up into the Waihi Valley, and into Hagen, where during Mogai, Konga ceremonies, you would see all this around you. And you didn't know that there was the sea. But my father would put to my ear the cowrie shell and say to me, close your eyes and listen. And that's what would be the sea. And then one day I saw the sea. And I said to my sister, look at it, look at all that water. But I think it's the curiosity of people throughout our parts of the world and from the Highlands that as our country opened up, we moved. We moved from mountain valleys. We moved to the coast. We saw the sea. We could see and watch how people from our coastal villages, how they lived, how they interacted with the ocean. And as you get to know that, you have a deep respect for that culture, as you do as you love the mountains in your valleys, you grow to love the sea too. And then when we became a member of the Pacific Island Forum, in 1974, prior to independence, Michael Samari, in his statement to the PIF in Ability, said, we don't come to rock the boat, we have come to add a sail to the canoe, so that we can then navigate and fulfill our dreams. Something to that effect at the end of the classroom. And that's what he did. This is a man from Murica, from the Sipi, where there's lakes and then there's the ocean. And if anybody could teach us all about what it meant to be part of the Pacific, was that relationship that he built with Rajamara. And then, prior to independence, Rajamara came to Papua New Guinea. I was assigned as his officer to accompany him. And in a DC-3 aircraft, we travelled to many places and to Bougainville. And that relationship that the two leaders in the Pacific established, I think gave for our country, in Papua New Guinea, a great sense of the opportunity that we had to be part of the Pacific. So through the national identity of a nation, of a country, that we could move to become part of the Pacific Island Forum, the SPC, FFA, Foreign Fisheries, and to be active in the voice of the negotiations, particularly on UNCLOS. People like Peter Levy, particularly, who played a big role in the Royal Sea Convention. The narrative of the Blue Pacific, if I may speak about that, because that emerged during my term as Secretary General. It wasn't something that just we looked at Epeli's writings and said, oh, well, we better find a narrative. Epeli's writings, and you know, I remember him as a very handsome man in UPNG campus. But he'd come in from the field and he'd be very softly spoken. And his family members still live in Papua New Guinea. Yeah. So the Hau'ofas are there. And I know that they would love to have been here, and I spoke to Michelle before I left and said that, you know, that this was to honour Epeli's writing ideas of the Pacific. But I think when he wrote these words, it came after the time he'd been back to Tonga. And then he came back to USP. I don't think he ever forgot us, those of us in Papua New Guinea where he began his life. But as it was almost to the end of the first term of my contract as Secretary General, when it was clear that we were struggling about just how we positioned ourselves in the discussions in the Pacific about how we saw ourselves. Epeli knew how to guide us to how we should see ourselves. But I think trying to find a narrative that would resonate throughout the Pacific was one that came from lots of discussions, and I owe a lot to Christelle Pratt, who's Deputy Secretary General, who would engage me in these long discussions about ocean continents, about, you know, how 40% of the Pacific Ocean is part of the Pacific. It's not just a sea that's out there that people cannot navigate. But through all those discussions at the forum, we looked at what Hau'ofa had written, we considered where we were at this time, and how we would pull everybody together so that we started defining just what the narrative was for ourselves and not others defining us. That we Indo-Pacific came later. And as Pacific Islanders, I don't accept Indo-Pacific. I understand it. And I know that the Americans have said it's their narrative, and they don't care what we think. Well, the Pacific is our narrative, and I don't care what they think. It was in Samoa at the Pacific Island Forum. Then the leaders of the Pacific adopted the Pacific narrative. And that's a narrative I hope that young people will carry on. They'll always treasure that it doesn't matter where you're from in the Pacific, whether you're from the big continent, Australia, from New Zealand, or from atolls, the centre of the Pacific.
Center of the world.
That all of this is about one people, it's all one.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Naroni. Thank you, Meg. And let me take this opportunity to extend our gratitude for being invited here to participate on this occasion. And of course, for the welcome, the speeches that were given earlier today, but of course, the welcome to country. And that ritual is extremely interesting because it is common to all of our cultures. It's just a purification ceremony, okay? And it's, I was talking to some young people who said, you know, what church do you belong to? We're Catholics. Have you ever seen the priest blessing the altar before he goes on to the altar to make the sacrifice? He uses the incense. And that is exactly the same ritual. So we're not pagans, you know. We actually knew about all of this before the Christians came. But thank you for that welcome to country, indeed. And it's Epeli is someone that I never had the opportunity to meet him. I was in London when he was there, and there was another Tongan lady who was there, and she said, let's go and see Epeli. And for some reason, we got separated, and I never did get the opportunity. But of course, even if I never met Epeli, I think the ripples of what Epeli has done in the region continue to ripple, to come around in whatever part of the Pacific you are. And I think what Epeli has left us with is a wonderful legacy, a legacy of being independent, being who you are, being proud of what you are. And I think part of that message is what has been able to take us through. And maybe I'll share some of this from my own personal experience in the advocacy work that I've been doing over the last 2 decades. And I remember in 2004, when I delivered my ever first address at the United Nations General Assembly. And before that, I was panicking. What the hell do I say in this huge, because I didn't want to sound like everybody else. And everybody else was talking about terrorism, okay? It was the key issue at the time, terrorism. And of course, we in the Pacific could not associate with that because it was not relevant to our way of life. And I was totally unwilling to do that. And so I asked my people, what can we talk about? And of course, I'd come across some literature on climate change. And of course, the thing that I saw, and it remained in my mind, was that the sea level was rising. And of course, in a situation like we are, and I'm speaking on behalf of my colleague, Hilda Heine, because the Marshalls and Kiribati are exactly the same. We are, okay, just imagine that this is the sea during the very high tide. Now the land would be where this is. That's even high. Okay, this is what we have to live with every day. And now we continue to believe that what is happening today is part of the normal cycle. But I tell you, it is not. And I tell you, not because, but it's from my own personal experience. And of course, reading all of the science tells me a totally different story. And so when I began to talk at the United Nations, my very first inaugural statement, I talked about climate change. Nobody else spoke about it. And I come away thinking, have I just made a fool of myself? Talking about something that doesn't seem to worry anybody else. But so gladly, the following year, other Pacific leaders started talking. And I think it was that hesitation, is it something that we need to talk about or is it not? But the science became more solid as the years went by. By the fourth assessment report of the IPCC in 2007, the science was fully established. Before that, of course, the fossil fuel industry continued to undermine the validity of the science. It was a very, very deliberate strategy on their part. But by the fourth assessment report, the mass of information coming forward, the body of scientists coming forward, stepping forward reached the point where the fossil fuel industry could no longer maintain that attack. And maybe we should have left them where they are because we thought they disappeared, but I assure you they have not. They've gone underground and come up behind our politicians, our political leaders, okay? Quietly whispering in their ears and filling their pockets, all right? Paying for their campaigns, okay? And I think that is the sad reality of what's happened on climate change. I've come here many times. I've spoken here on a number of occasions. And the mystery, because in the past, I thought it's the government of the day. But now, it's a different government of a different day, okay? And I really was hoping for a much more ambitious action on climate change. But no, I was here in October, and no, I'm not getting that sense. And I asked, what's happened? I think somebody just, whether off the cuff, we said, oh, you know what it is, okay? I didn't want to believe it because it told me that maybe we are wasting our time fighting this battle. But then there are times when I want to give up. I just say, what am I doing? I've wasted the last 20 years of my life trying to turn this around, but it's not coming around. And what keeps me going is my wife. She nags me and said, because I said, I'm not doing it anymore. And she says, no, you cannot stop. And the reason is because we've got more than 20 grandchildren, okay? And they keep coming, all right? And so, it is for that reason that we can never give up. Giving up is not an option. And so I love the voice of the young people. We're not drowning. But it's the defiant call for action. We're not drowning. We are fighting. Okay? And I love the emotion, the passion, because there was a time when I felt so. But I must admit that I've come round and I said, no, it's not going to happen. There are times when I virtually lie down and say, come on, why are you wasting your time? But I have seen a tremendous amount of change from the 2009 Copenhagen meeting, when we were all so excited because the United States is stepping forward with a new president, with Barack Obama. And but I remember just before that meeting, I was in a small meeting where Obama was there, the former Chinese leader was there, and other leaders, mostly the big polluters were there. And I was one from the islands. And here I was feeling intimidated by these guys. But I said, no, I cannot be intimidated because I'm a lone voice, but it does not matter. If I don't speak, nobody else is going to be speaking in the midst of these guys. And so they're talking. And so I scribbled a note over to the Secretary General. Can you give me the floor? And so I said, I hear you, all of you. You're all talking about your economies. But here I am talking about the survival of our people in our part of the world. And I'd like you to take that into consideration in addition to what you're talking about. Because we're talking about the same issue, but from different angles. And so I think the spirit that Epeli left us with was one, you got to fight for what you want. And I think what angered me most was the future that we are facing today. And all of that was being decided in the boardrooms in New York, in London, Tokyo maybe, but mostly where the fossil fuel industry reside. And so this is one of the reasons that I had to come and step forward and keep being a nuisance and keep trying to do it. And I must say that the action of the young people when coming forward was really it was so inspiring for me, because here it is, maybe I did make a difference. Maybe the voice that I've been putting forward is now inspiring these young people to step forward. It is your world. Okay? We will do as much as we can to try to guarantee you the future that you deserve. But at the end of the day, it is your world that you have to live with. We won't survive beyond 2060. If so, I think I'd be saying some very stupid things by then. But I think this is where we as a region have been able to shape and influence the international agenda. On climate change, the Pacific stepped forward. We led on that one. On the oceans, the Pacific stepped forward. We led. And I think this is so inspiring, because for me, it demonstrates that no matter how small you are, if you are passionate enough, if you are relevant enough to the issue that is being discussed, then you have no choice but to step forward, because nobody else is going to do it for you. And so, the momentum of climate action has built up. I'm so encouraged. But then I look beneath and nothing has changed. Because the ones that we need to talk to are hiding behind our political leaders. And so that is the greatest tragedy. I've been interacting with leaders at different levels. And here in Australia, climate change is a damn political football. From administration to administration, it keeps getting kicked around. It becomes a serious issue, then it becomes nothing. Now it's become a half-serious issue again, okay? So I think it is our task to work together. Tell them, I think all the moral people are on board. It's the immoral people that we must speak to. Seriously. Yep. And we have to find a way to speak their language. I don't know how. I really don't know how. I've been looking for an answer, apart from, once I was talking to young people here in Australia, over there, and they asked me, what should we do? Okay, look around. If there are any children at your school whose parents are from the fossil fuel industry, tell them that their parents are destroying their future. And if you can do it, go and picket their front lawns. But I think we've got to take a different scale of a way to communicate. And so today, we are screaming, our young people are screaming, we're not drowning. And so when we were discussing whether we were coming or not, and I thought I would add to those few words, we're not drowning. And my simple addition is but why don't we just take life jackets as well? I'll tell you a story about the Secretary General of the United Nations. I pestered both Kofi Annan and then Ban Ki-moon. Of course, Kofi Annan was focused on terrorism. Ban Ki-moon listened, and I kept knocking on his door every time. And then one day, he agreed to come. And he came in 2011. And so he came, and I sent him code, took him around. And by the evening, he came around, and so he said, Secretary General, what have you seen? Oh, I've listened to you speak year after year. I never truly understood. Now that I have seen not only do I understand, but I feel. And I promise you, I will do everything in my power to do what I can. But what he did not know, and so he kept telling the story at meetings internationally. Sometimes I walk in and he's already telling the story. But the story he never tells is all the while he was in Kiribati, his security people were walking behind him with life jacket for him. But you understand, for those of you who have never been to the islands will understand, because here you have the luxury of looking down on the ocean. In the islands, you're looking at the sea, all right? And that's what we have to live with. And so I really want to inspire our young people to keep going, because we are running out of energy, okay? And may God bless you. I wish you all the best.
That's actually an amazing segue to our next three speakers. Thank you so much for setting that stage, because you're absolutely right. It's been the young people, many young Pacific people who've been stepping up, and they've been carrying that message in many different forms. So I'd really like to turn it over to Moimoana Schwenke, who is an amazing young person, climate activist, dancer, performer, works in the heritage and arts sector, who's definitely been one of these young people who have been trying to get that message across in many different ways. So Moimoana, welcome, and it's so wonderful to have you here, as well as being part of the Pacific diaspora in Australia.
Thank you, Katerina. Talofa lava and warm Pacific greetings, everyone. My name is Moimoana Schwenke. Deeply humbled to be amongst all of you, and really I was thinking, who am I to sit next to these dignitaries who have done so much in their life? And you know, the path that you have laid out, we are able to draw inspiration from as young people. I am from the beautiful island of Samoa. I am a proud Pacific woman, a product and custodian of Oceania, and I can proudly say that I am community and village made. Katerina, your question was about how I use culture in my own work. I was very fortunate to grow up and have roots that were anchored in my culture because of the teachings of my parents and my grandparents and the people who in my family, namely. And over time, I've really come to realize how culture can serve as a portal into the past to help inform our present, but also to help us navigate our future as Pacific people in the islands, as well as around the diasporas. I have always tried to keep it centered in my life, despite turbulences and despite the hardships that we face as young people in places like Sydney, where I live. I am currently residing on Darawal and Darug country, which is in Wollongong and some areas of Western Sydney. It's namely through dance. So dance has been my main vehicle, which I use to express, and I believe it's probably the most authentic way I can express spiritually and physically how much my islands mean to me and how much my people and culture mean to me. And it's been the canoe kind of that sent me on a lot of epic journeys around not only the Pacific, but also around the world. I was a teenager, very curious to learn more about Pacific knowledge and learn more about Pacific dance. So when I was 16, I joined a Cook Islands dance crew. I'm not a Cook Islander, but I was so interested in Cook Islands dancing and what dance means to them that I went and joined their national dance competition in the Cook Islands. When I was 18, I was so curious to learn about Tahitian culture that I lived there for a few months and trained with the Tahitian group as the only Samoan. And I got to learn about their culture and taught them about mine. Other experiences like joining the World Fire Knife competition as one of only 7 women, and really trying to pave the way for young girls to learn the art of sivafi, which originates in Samoa. All of these experiences were because of my curiosity to learn more about my place in this big Pacific Ocean, an ocean that our ancestors navigated and traded in amongst like a highway. And I wanted to be like that ancestor that tries to go to every island and learn about the cultures that reside in those lands. The knowledge that I was able to gather in every island was invaluable. It's more than I've ever learned in any institution. It's learning the essence of what it means to be a Pacific person. And something that is most notable is our cultural values that I know, far and wide, wherever you go in the Pacific, you're always met with those cultural values of love, honor, respect, reciprocity, service. And that's to each other as people, but also to the environment, to the sky, the land, and the ocean. And I don't know if you can find that anywhere else in the world besides where Indigenous people reside in. The very first dance that I learned was when I was 5 years old. It was a Siva Samoa that my mum taught me, and it was actually about a bird. This bird is from Samoa, the manumea bird. It's our national bird. And I remember she taught me the movements of how the bird would wake, how the bird would hunt, how they would protect their children. And I learned at 5 years old the power of how dance is ancestral movements that reflect what is around us, but also how it can be used as activism, which I have continued on today, using dance as activism. And we continue to see in Indigenous resistance movements, leaders drawing upon their cultures for empowerment. And I think the most notable movements for climate justice have been those that have drawn upon their culture through dance, through song, through storytelling. And that's very unique to us as Pacific people. We see this today. So like all the stories that you have shared, despite colonialism dispossessing us of our land, despite the nuclear testing in our oceans, the Australian government's inaction on climate change, we see time and time again, Pacific people never give up, and they keep fighting back against all of these hardships with big happy smiles, and through our art forms, which we use as weapons, and it's our modern day weapons of how we fight the climate issues that we face today. And I saw in our tribute Haunani K. Trask, she says this beautiful statement that has always stuck with me. It's how we have to maintain culture as the main source of our resistance. She said, cultural people have to become political. Our culture can't just be ornamental or recreational. It has to be the core of our resistance, the core of our anger, the core of our mana. And we see today, especially in the Pacific dance world, a lot of it can become recreational, but it's so important to teach our young people that we can't just, dance with no meaning. We have to have meaning behind what we're doing. We see today that Pacific people are facing the hardest effects of climate change, but they are not, vulnerable and waiting for help. They are leading the way, and the world is now looking into the Pacific for the solutions that we need on climate change, and it's because of our Indigenous knowledges. And that's what we have to be grateful, and making sure that we're honoring those people that have come before us and doing all that we can to learn about it. We saw right at the top of the Pacific when Hawaiians mourned the threat to Mauna Kea, they gathered together, united through song and dance, and they stayed on those lands because that's how much the land meant to them. And then we go all the way down to the bottom of the Pacific in Aotearoa, New Zealand, around the same time when there was a threat to ihumātao in that native land. They did the same thing. Māori came together with haka, with song and dance, and they ensured that their Pacific way of resistance was seen and heard. My whole childhood, when I was in Samoa, New Zealand, and Australia, I was very grateful to have parents that really tried to retain Samoan culture while living away from their homeland. So, in Auckland, in our garage, they would hold dance classes and try and teach language to youth around our area. They represented Samoa around the world, And then once we came to Australia, it was a whole different playing field because we really felt like the minority. And I remember distinctly when I was 12 years old, I turned on the news to see a chain of news kind of posts saying that Pacific people are violent, they're thieves, they're assaulters, they're, you know, the main gang muscle for youth-related violence. And constantly being fed all of these negative stereotypes and stigmas really started to make me feel ashamed of being a Pacific person. And as someone who was born in Samoa but then moved to diaspora, I really always looked in awe to Pacific culture, but suddenly moving to Australia, that was all kind of crumbling down, and I started really believing all of these narratives that were being fed to us. So that's when we created this cultural centre, which I currently am a dancer at and tutor, and it's called Matavai Pacific Cultural Arts. And Matavai in several Pacific languages means the eye of the water or the source of the water. And Matavai quite literally in our place in Liverpool, Western Sydney, we serve as a source of inspiration, as a source of belonging for our young people, a source of culture and art forms. And although, you know, it's still difficult to try and preserve and perpetuate our culture away from our homelands, we do all we can through dance, through music, through storytelling, and through theatre. At the moment, we have 400 students enrolled in term 1, and we're reaching our 10th year this year. So I can proudly say that since I was 12 years old, I have been part of this journey of helping our young people receive these gifts that we've been passed down from our ancestors, and, you know, continue to do that today. Something that I've really learned while being at Matavai and being part of, you know, the Samoan Pacific diaspora is that being part of the minority is not something that should be looked down upon. It's always been kind of my superpower rather than being a part of the majority, and that's what we teach a lot of our young people, because it is very easy to feel small in a place like Australia, and then when you tell people where you're from, it's these tiny dots on the map, so there's, you know, you're constantly feeling small. But Epeli Hau'ofa, and especially in our Sea of Islands, he tells us that we're not small, we're from ocean continent that our ancestors traversed and treated like a highway. And how could we ever feel small when our ancestors went through some of the hardest things in history, being dispossessed of their lands, but still fighting back? You know, dispossessed of their culture, but still trying to maintain it and blend it with Christian faith. And now, today, the impacts of climate change affect our people, yet our leaders, like yourself, you continue to rebuild and recover and fight back. And that's something that I'll always forever be grateful for and ensure that we pass on to the next generation as well. Hau'ofa also wrote that we only have to look to our myths and our legends and our oral traditions to see that Pacific people did not view the world in microscopic proportions, but in fact, they thought big and recounted their deeds in epic proportions. And that's something we have to keep on reminding our young people to mobilize their talents or their passions, you know, whether it be music. So we've seen a rising in hip-hop interests, especially from Pacific youth in Australia, using those talents to counteract the matters that affect the Pacific. And think in epic proportions. Think of themselves as people standing on the shoulders of giants and shoulders of our ancestors who did so much. And I've learned this especially at working at the Australian Museum. We have over 60,000 Pacific artifacts. My manager is Melissa Malu, who's also in the audience. It's awesome to have leaders who really try and pave the way for young people. So working with these artifacts, you really see the brilliance of our ancestors, how they made things with their hands from the land. They weaved the most finest mats, they made the most coarse spark cloth, made costumes from birds from every part of the land. And that's what our ancestors did, and it was all made from what was around them. Last example of something that was really heavily influenced by Hau'ofa was last year I decided to try and get into writing and directing, and last year at Matavai we made a show called Motu of Western Sydney. Motu in some Pacific languages means islands, and we were kind of saying like the community in Western Sydney was like our own little island. Basically what this story was about was youth struggling through the COVID lockdowns. So I'm not sure if you know, in Western Sydney, it's one of the most multicultural parts of Sydney. There was a lot of racially discriminative actions done towards these communities that lived there. They were heavily surveilled. There was so much more rules put onto them, and you saw a lot of negative effects because of that. There was mental health issues, high rates of suicide, increasing youth-related violence, and unfortunately a lot of the people that were involved in that was Pacific youth. So Motu of Western Sydney, we banded together with community groups. There was over 200 Pacific people, mostly youth, and it was told through acting, through dance and song. And the story was about two young people and how their ancestors kind of guide them through life and throw in all of these stories. Some stories were like in the Cook Islands when the Blue Law forbid them to sing and dance, and how they overcame that. In Samoa, the Mau movement, and how Tupua Tamasese, peacefully rallied, and he was sacrificed, his blood was sacrificed for Samoa. All of these stories we try and teach our youth, and it's stories that they don't unfortunately teach in school. The show also held up a mirror to ourselves and to the wider community of what needs need to be met. And I like to think of this show as like how Hau'ofa rewrote the imperialist tropes of Oceania. We tried to rewrite the negative stereotypes and instead replace it with positive, meaningful messages of who we really are. And I think from what I've learned from all of this is that although the world is crazy and turbulent, something that we can really do to make change is to influence the communities that we are a part of. And the community that we are a part of is Oceania, this great big blue continent. And we can't go against big corporations and governments without fully being united. As Oceania, a big continent, and there's always stories of, Micronesia, Polynesia, Melanesia, and these labels that sometimes divide us, when really, if we look back in history, our legends always met, our islanders always met at some point in history. And Hau'ofa, he really reminds us that we need to think that the same ocean that washes up on your shore is the same ocean that washes up on mine. And that sometimes life can feel like the ocean and it can feel like a battle, but to know that after storms, the ocean always returns to calm. So I'd like to really thank you all for your work in not only for climate change, but for the future generation, which crosses over all of the matters that affect the Pacific. Yeah.
Wow, Moi Moana, I'm in awe of you, and thank you so much for sharing. It's no coincidence that one of Epeli's biggest arguments in our Sea of Islands was for the arts. So a lot of people talk about his oceanic vision and focus on the ocean, but he was making a serious and hard argument for all of us centering our songs, our dances, our chants, music, architecture, weaving, tattooing. He was making an argument for all of those things that you and your community and your family have been supporting for so many in Western Sydney. So I'm getting emotional about it. But yes, thank you so much for the incredible work you all do. Thank you. Yeah. Somebody else who does incredible work for their community is Isinterunga Rei Paintes, and it's actually so exciting for me as a Banabin, who's usually the Lone Ranger Banabin in the room at almost any space that I go into, to have another Banabin on this panel. We probably come from one of the smallest, tiniest islands in the Pacific, 6 square kilometers, and boy, have we been fighting for it for many decades. And Ray has been doing incredible work with our communities in the diaspora, in Kiribati, in Fiji. And when you talked of service, to be honest, I have never seen anyone with the level of service that Ray provides for so many people across so many countries, all dedicated to many of the issues that you have all raised here. It's actually quite astounding how much you do, Ray, as well as your regional and global advocacy on issues such as climate change. So I'm so excited to have you on this panel, because I've been watching you for a long time, and many of us in the Banabin and Kiribati community have been watching you, and what you do is quite astounding with your level of service and support for so many things. So over to you, Ray. Yeah.
And just before I start off, I'm also very stiff like yourself, so let's just shake our hands like this. I don't like sitting for a long time, especially on the plane, because they have small seats. But my name is Interunga, and the name I use the most is Ray, because it's very short. And if I tell them, and then they'll start pronouncing Isinterunga and other pronunciations that I don't even know. But Isinterunga was a name given to me by my granddad. And the name has links to Kusai. If I may, can I stand? Please, chill out. I just have some kind of, you know, when you're gonna dance and something comes to you, like the spirits making you. But the name was given to me because I was born in Rambi in Fiji. And I didn't realize that my name was Isinterunga, because I knew Ray was a name given to me by the nurses of Lambasa Hospital in Vanuatu, because I was born during a cyclone season on 21st March 1990. So I was called Cyclone Ray, and then after that my granddad's relatives in Pokonikai, one of the villages in Rambi, said, hey, remove Cyclone, he's like, give him this name, Isinterunga. And I never realized that we were not indigenous people of Fiji until I was in class 6. Then I started figuring that, you know, we are somehow very different in Fiji. And the name that was given to me is a name of a relative that were dispersed from Banaba in the modern day Kiribati to Kusai. Then later on I started asking questions, a lot of questions. Why did you name me Isinterunga? And my grandfather said, with the hope that you can reunite with your families that has lost touch with us because of the many waves of displacement that happened because of phosphate mining. And so from that day on, we've been searching, but not doing the actual search. It's the work that brings me to platforms like Google and other stuff, that these names appear, and then people start connecting through, asking why did I get their family name, and I'm not from Kusai. But that was the link between our story. In 2004, I had the opportunity to go to Kiribati because my parents migrated there. And that was the turning point in my life. As we were flying to the airport, my brother was saying, hey, look at Kiribati. And I was just surprised that it was a very low-lying atoll country. And I was, at that age, I was like, so where do we go? Do they have a farm? You know, because every time we go back to Rambi, our dad always take us to the farm. 2 days or 3 days after we reach home, with the hope that if we don't finish our school, that's the life we'll have. Let's go up to the plantation and farm. So by the first week, I'm asking Dad, can you send us back to Suva? And when we were in Kiribati, I said, man, this is really bad. Like, that was the turning point of my life. And then later on, I finished my high school in Kiribati, and then I went back, did some studies in Suva at the Fiji National University, and then I went back to work in Kiribati, and I've had a lot of time talking with my elders, my grandfather. And when I worked in Kiribati, my second employment was with the local government, and all of our members were mayors. And I had another platform at the age of 20. I had my 21st birthday during the first annual general meeting because it was a new office at the time. And I spent a lot of time just talking with my elders, and looking back, I said, man, our elders in Rambi are disappearing so quickly. And when they were relocated to Rambi, they were not documented. Most of our histories, most of our genealogies were never packed, and they were never stored in ways that could survive through the ages. And right now, a lot of chaos is happening. And there's a word in Banaba that we use, and it's called te tau. And this is a question that I bring up thinking of one of Kiribati scholar, Te Veiari ki te aro. In 2021, when he was feeling really sick, I had the time, because during the time I was in Auckland studying at Massey University doing social work. And I also had a time to work with Pacific communities up at the Maurangi area up north, serving Tuvaluans and our Kiribati folks on different aspects of migrations because of economic reasons through the RSC, because families chose to come through the Pacific Access category, and through other secular migration that allows them to be there for 3 months and 9 months and go back. The whole time I was there for 5 years, I felt that, it's like a fantasy world that we promote to our people, that Australia and New Zealand has got the solution for our problems. But actually, as a social worker training at the time, I was really disappointed that the laws were not even working for them. And I was there during COVID. And during COVID, we couldn't assist a lot of our migrant communities that were there on these different visas. We had to work day and night, and I had restrictions as well because I was on student visa at the time. So all of these experiences in New Zealand really, empowered me to think of the kind of migration that our people had to go through because of extractive industries. And, I made a conclusion to say, man, we should be telling our people that the best option is to stay at home. And I turned to our elders on the right. I'd like to thank Ano Te Tong, because in 2004, or was it 2014, we were doing an advocacy because of climate change, and we were knocking on his doors, and he let us in with a couple of young people, and we sat and we asked, can you please help us, take us to the Marshall Islands so that we can form a coalition of youth of atoll nations to talk about climate change using talent, singing. And so we went to the Marshall Islands. And I'm also turned to the crowd from the Edmund Rice Center, Pacific Calling Partnership. Maria and Corinne were here with Charlotte. They also sustained that program, and they took one of our young person to the seats that happened in Samoa, and also took us to COP. And so it's this level of engagement with our leaders, such as Anote, that does not always just talk about the issue, but actually, provides an enabling environment for young people to come through. Because at the end of that engagement, we took outcome documents to the COP, to promote it at the COP between a coalition of young people. And at the time, I look at Kathy, I remember her good friend and maybe family, Milang. When I was in the Marshall Islands, I didn't know that she was the daughter of the president who got us to have dinner sorry? Yeah. And so she was the youth officer at the Ministry for Youth at the time, and she was helping us, and I was saying, Milang, can you do this? Can you do this? And when her dad, welcomed us during the dinner, she said, and I'm really happy that my daughter has done a perfect job to look after you guys. And I had to apologize 1,000 times. But it's these traits that we have as Pacific Islanders, to be able to be humble and to work as families. And we put aside everything that, just to help one another. And I remember the issue when our current government, pull out from the PIFs for maybe a reason that's but also it was hard to bring them back, but it was a Pacific brother that came to bring them back. So, with all these stories, and I'm thinking, and I'm just thinking about the question that's being posed, like, what are your thoughts on collective identity? And for me personally, it's not a new thing for Pacific Islanders. We've always been a collective, not individualistic, we always navigated our ways as a collective, as families. And I refer to my culture that was given to me, te tau. Te tau is, like Te Veiariki had explained, I did pose a question to this scholar. Can you define human rights? And I asked him this question because every time we introduce a human rights element in Kiribati, something big happens after that. So what are we doing? Are we really introducing good rights or something new to our society that triggers them to do it, to do the kind of... And so he told me, the best way we can describe human rights is in the Banaban culture of Te Tau. And Te Tau, he defined it as, so Te Veiariki spent most of his years studying all the islands of Kiribati and the cultures. And he said, I found this knowledge from Banaba, and it's called Te Tau. And Te Tau is translated as a social responsibility. So human rights for us, I can define it as a social responsibility, because if it's taken from you, you retaliate. Because that is your social responsibility. And I'm going to put this in a clear concept, in the Banaban concept. Every family, every Banaban family has Te Tau. So for example, if we were to have a guest visiting the island, social responsibilities are divided among clans and families and genealogies. So I cannot use Katarina's Tau. I cannot use anyone else's Tau. Because if I do that, it creates a lot of tension within the communities. And at most times, now we hear, because of the displacement of the Banaban people, that has been dismantled and disturbed and disrupted, And that is because of extractive industries, colonialism, forced relocation, and all other elements that, just wrap around these issues, that we are now also disputing our own genealogies in Fiji. Because we did not record, and if we had recorded, we had a gap that was missing, and we are trying to recreate genealogies by what we remember, which is creating a lot of and stirring a lot of issues in our communities. And so the work and the thing that I love about working for, advocating on climate change, and climate change is quite broad, I acknowledge that, but I went into pursuing a lot of interest in climate mobility and human displacement. Because it's different when you have experienced and gone through the process. Like, it's a matter of the heart, And so I try and, come in every space to share the story, to say that no one else should be displaced like the Banabans. Banabans should be the last people. That's the angle I come in. Not to come in to provoke other things that happened in the past, but to say I've lived the experience. And I've seen and I've worked with people that are migrating because of these schemes that are being brought up to promote economic development. And they're not working. And so I guess I also turned to MacDame because as part of that engagement with the Pacific Youth Council, I started in 2017 is when we addressed the Human Rights Council in Geneva on the climate mobility and human displacement. And all of this work has been possible because of people like our elders who are seated here. And Dame has been a staunch supporter of the Pacific Youth Council. She has been opening doors for us and making that network. And it's, I keep following her. I admire her a lot, both elders. And I'm just happy that tonight I'm able to share this space with them. Because these are leaders, and of course, Moe, I watched the Motu of Western Sydney. For some reason, we just kind of connected, and when Kati said, do you know Moe? And I said, who? Oh, Moe, yes. She also gave us a tour of the Council of Elders for 350 Pacific Climate Warriors to the collection of 60,000 artifacts that are in their collection. And, she told me, you must come and see the Banaban and Kiribati artifacts. And then one of the questions I asked was, what do we do with them? It's a question of economic and non-economic losses. And as a person, I've gone through that process. That's why I see Yuki in this room with Kati, who did Project Banaba and Te Kanias, in New Zealand, and I supported the community component of it. Just last 2 months, we had the Silo 6 exhibition, which also talks about the story using dance and arts. But these are the things that we are rewriting. Because if we don't do it, who's going to do it? And that's why I always say the Pacific Islanders have always been a collective. We've never operated in silos. We've never operated in small units. We've always been that collective. And so my thought really, and this is my closing statement, is this. There are gaps. And if you look up, studies on collective, collective identity, there are scant literature that's, that says, because actually we've lived all our lives and through generations through a collective and it was dismantled. And so if we are promoting regionalism in the Pacific, I think we really need to be looking at who is part of the bigger picture that's disconnected to this culture of collectivism. And this goes to policies, legislations, who are, the powerhouse behind these frameworks in the Pacific that are pushing. Because the way I see it, we are not progressing, as I would have imagined, like what our elder Anote said. There are disconnects. And so I think for anything blue, we need to put aside all other things that are blocking our way to join, one bit as a community, as people of the ocean together to push our development agenda of the Pacific and to accelerate it. Because I think we're soon going to be, wearing life jackets like our elder said. Thank you.
Korapa, Ray, Vinaka, thank you so much for those amazing words and for sharing your experience. I definitely agree. The story of Banaba is the story of potentially of the whole Pacific and hopefully not of the whole world, but it covers so many issues like displacement and loss and the need to continue to fight to protect who we are and where we come from. Our final speaker tonight is Chope Tarai. Feel free to stand if you also need to, like Ray. Chope is an emerging scholar and Pacific intellectual who focuses on governance issues, and through your experiences, for example, working for the University of the South Pacific and on many other projects, how do you see these oceanic regional visions, the ocean in us or the Pacific way? We've heard so many manifestations of it tonight. How do you see it intersecting with the needs and issues of students, Pacific students, students in the islands, students beyond the islands, scholars on the ground? Are these visions relevant? Are they regularly harnessed? And including in your own work, do they empower or do they constrain? And how often do they get appropriated by others beyond the fields of Pacific studies, especially in ways that might be more superficial rather than deeply informed? And I feel like we've heard so many amazing stories already of the deep manifestations of it. Over to you, Chope.
Thank you so much to Professor Karina and of course the elders and to the youth of the indigenous custodies in the language in which we speak, and all of the different people here that I draw so much wisdom and knowledge from. At the moment, it's so, I don't know, I feel like Professor has described somebody else when she says Pacific intellectual and what have you, because I don't know if Mike is here. We've chosen to identify ourselves as reformed cannibals, largely, and I'll explain why. Largely because, and speaks to the tropes that Moana was talking about. Largely because there was a policy writing of some kind, and this speaks to the whole idea of belittlement. We were shocked to find these, we're supposed to be an academic, we undergo reviews, and we find that non-Pacific scholars don't have so much of a tough review than us. Then we find this policy writing at the bottom, which describe in a belittling sort of way about Papua New Guinea as something along the lines as, for a country that used to practice cannibalism just a few years ago is now thriving in the resource sector. Yeah. And I had to check with Michael twice. Well, who is this? And he said, oh, well, so in a way responding to what Moana was saying, I mean, in the way in which your community works with it is through dance, we make fun of it. So now we are the reformed cannibals because we've been thoroughly Christianized. But I have to say, just to share, my reflections, I'll try to run through it quickly because I don't have much of anything new to contribute. But I just want to share that answering this question, I've prepared utilizing this old book, which I must also acknowledge Professor Greg Fry. Because as a very useless student as I was, when I stumbled upon his class, he mentioned this. Even as a Fijian, I had no idea the Pacific Way was written by Ratumara. I just heard it in speeches, and I was the aimless child wandering around USP campus trying to find, grog sessions for free. And of course, the new Oceania book, which again, I found when we were told to clean out an old room, and it fell from a box. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And little did I realize it had not only our Sea of Violence essay, but the reflections from all different academics and critical scholars about it and all these other criticisms. And last but definitely not the least, my preparation for what I had to contribute today, I have to thank Dame Meg and of course President Anotitonga. Sorry, I keep calling you President because in my mind, you're sort of the president in the forefront of environmentalism. In the last 2 days, I had the honor of sharing a long hour of lunch with the two of you on two separate occasions, and a lot of the things that are in these books really galvanize the way in which I see this question, and I hope that you also have books that many others will resort to in the future. So, this question, how do I see it in terms of the ocean in us and the Pacific Way? And I have to admit, Professor, it was really difficult for me to unpack this question, largely because I find, and I'm sorry to be bleak, To me, the ideal of overcoming belittlement and what is often thrown around now as the ocean continent and so on has been kidnapped. It's been kidnapped, and in a way I think about it as a family member that's been taken from us. The reason why I say that is because I've sat in meetings, especially with those great superpower intellectuals who throw back to us, this is what the ocean continent is about. It's about security, it's about da-da-da-da-da. There's submarines and blah, 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 blah. But I've been very fortunate to be anchored by these books and the different writings, and of course Hau'ofa's seminal ideas about overcoming belittlement, because it strengthens that resolve to understand that our blue ocean has been kidnapped, so to speak, in certain ways. We need to reclaim it. We need to find this kidnapped idea. And for students, your question poses issues for students. To me, the aspect of belittlement for students, and sorry, let me clarify. The reason why I'm talking about students is largely because I've worked majority of my life, a working life for that matter, in the University of the South Pacific, which is often touted as the ideal institution of regionalism, which cuts across 12 member countries. And I have to say, there's so many things that happen there, students from all across the Pacific that tell you how development doesn't work. And every day I learn something new, especially when there are prime ministers, presidents' children sitting in the room who will tell you, no, that's not how my father describes development. That's not how my father describes corruption. That's what you think it is, but it's difficult when everybody's related. That's not nepotism. And so, if you get my drift. But of course, you know, the dominating literature tells us, no, that's nepotism. But how can you describe that when there's 2,000 people on the island and everybody's cousins with each other? But in any case, for students, the main issue of belittlement, as far as my very limited working life in the university has been, is unemployment. And I say that on two specific examples. When the riots happened in Solomon Islands, I got to learn from, and I have to acknowledge this Pacific elder as well, Dr. Transform, when he came here, because not many people paid so much mind to him, we had so much time with him. He talked about the fact that the riots were involving young people not because they were anti-China or what have you, but because they don't have opportunities. And that resonated with me as a teacher at the university, because you see that. We have so many overqualified graduates who don't have employment to go back to. And so to me, that is the key issue of belittlement, is the lacking opportunity of employment. The second example is in Fiji, as we speak, we have a pervasive problem of brawls that's happening almost at every corner at any given point, especially close to weekends. And it's that death of employment opportunities, the sense of meaning, the sense of place that is happening. And to me, that in and of itself is really something that is a weakness for one main reason across the Pacific. And that is the statistics reveal, and Dr. Aidan Craney will affirm this, that majority of the population across every Pacific Island country, or majority, are young people. Whichever way you slice the national youth policy of each country, the majority of the electorate, the majority of the population are young people. And so that means, some scholars tend to be alarmist and say, we have a ticking time bomb. That means we have an opportunity. And that means we have an opportunity where these people are not only doing advocacy work, screaming about our issues, affirming it, it's also about time that the leadership cadre class in the Pacific look after them. And I apologize, sorry. I say that because it's exhausting to find such bright young minds who are so overqualified. When you go into the region, they don't have access. And I know the regional leaders have so many things to deal with externally, but I think also it's about time to give back to the young people. And often at times I don't find that they're given enough. Because if we can find money for big military infrastructure, if we can find money for great per diems for families to travel overseas, we can also find money, or at least innovative ideas, to accommodate these young people. The second part, which is the issues towards scholars, and I say this because of my experience of having to come here to Canberra. I'm here for about a year now, since Feb. And I have to admit, it's very interesting to see the dynamic in the way in which we are belittled in unconscious ways unintentional ways. Whether it be I am a reformed cannibal, or if I'm on the bus and somebody can't stop staring at me and I'm thinking, am I in the 1970s or are we in the 2023? However, for scholarship specifically, I urge Pacific leaders to please publish. And I can't stress that enough, to publish so that we can cite you. So that we can cite you. So because the other frontier that is ongoing here is the fact that sometimes we have to cite 3-4 different people who are not from our region just for the most obvious fact that you and I both know, to be validated in these publications, to be validated in these agenda set strategies. So I beg of the Pacific elders and the Pacific leaders to write and publish so that we can follow that particular lead. The second part that's layered in that is the fact that I urge Pacific governments, as much as there are particular issues that can be dealt with externally, unfortunately, the ideals of overcoming belittlement, Hau'ofa's ideals of that solidarity is nothing but speaking terms of talkfests that we often engage in. When we go behind the closed rooms, and I say this in terms of the USP saga, I say this paying a tribute to the students that stood up when the leaders refused to stand up. They didn't read these things. They saw what was right, what was wrong, and they stood up to the leaders. What did our leaders and some prominent academics did? They were quiet, or as I was told, that's called strategic silence. So it's not all doom and gloom. My hope is in the young people of the Pacific region, as we have heard so eloquently spoken today. My hope is in the fact that this ideal will actually grow much further than rhetoric. And most of all, my hope is in looking forward to your books to be published so that we can cite them as reformed cannibals. Thank you.
I think reformed cannibal is an amazing way to end our night. Unfortunately, we are fast running out of time. If we haven't already run out of time, and I know you all must be hungry and want to mingle and celebrate, so I won't ask everyone if they have any final words, but if you do have a final word, especially Dame Meg, who conceived of this panel, which has been so profound and so powerful. And I think the message is loud and clear that we need the Tui Loma Naromi Slade book, we need the Meg Taylor book, and we need the Anote Tong book, ASAP. So I'm sure there's some wonderful young people out there who would love to shadow and follow you and write this story down. I would love any final words to come from you, because we are unfortunately out of time, but this has been a profound, wonderful, amazing, and also super different kind of plenary, not just for AAPS, but for ANU in general when it comes to the Pacific. So I'm just so humbled and so excited that we could make this happen with all of you. It's totally blown my mind. But final words, please.
Well, I have to say that it was solid that worked with me to make this happen, and yourself, Katerina. Nothing happens alone in Pacifica. We're always all together in this. I think what I would like to just remind us all, those of us senior people, people who are getting into the middle of their careers as well, as you see the young ones coming through, is to try and always reinforce the confidence in them of who they are and the contribution that they can make to the region that we love. And I think all of us here would like to all be remembered as citizens of the Blue Pacific, not just because it's a narrative alone, but it's about a place that we really belong. And I think earlier in the evening you asked how would you want to be remembered. I would really like to remember things that one does in life that are really important. But I think that for all of us senior people here, people could say that they really put their heart into preparing the Pacific for the young, for the next generations. And the work they do is to make it a better place. And it's not going to be easy, we all know that. But every one of you has a responsibility, whether you're from a small island or from a big country. I won't be here, I won't be with you for the rest of the seminar. I just want to say I apologise. But all of you know that we've always bid farewell to things that we love. So I have to leave you. And, Sarabi was known to many of you. And I see my friend Anthony reading there, and you Sarabi know too. So I'll be leaving very early tomorrow morning. So thank you for having me, and thank you for having all of us who are on this.
Thank you so much to all of you, and thank you to everyone in the audience for your energy and your attention for this incredible, incredible panel in honor of Epeli. He wrote in Our Sea of Islands, we are the sea, we are the ocean, we will not let them belittle us again and take away our freedom. And so I think on that note, let's go be free to mingle and celebrate our panel.